in Candia, not on Cyprus, on his return voyage. The episode in Cyprus, the only one recorded in the Franciscan sources, is an indication of an early Franciscan presence on the island. It is obvious that we cannot speak of a stable presence when Francis was still alive. However, we are certain that, according to this account, that Brother Barbaro was present on the island. Francis was informed of the episode when he was already in Italy. Could he have left Brother Barbaro in Cyprus on his way back to Italy? This could also be a possibility, but again, we can find no documentation to prove it in the Franciscan sources or in the writings of Franciscan historians. One thing is significant, namely that Franciscan presence in Cyprus goes back to the 13th century, when Cyprus was under Lusignan domination, and its closeness to the Crusader capital Acre made it a convenient port of call for missionaries on their way to the Holy Land. We shall now practically conclude with a short look at the early establishments of the Friars Minor here in Cyprus. The thorough historical analysis of Paolo Piraccini on the presence and ministry of the Franciscans in Cyprus along 8 centuries gives a detailed and clear view of the efforts of the Franciscan order to secure a foothold on the island. The Franciscans who came to Cyprus and settled there were always part and parcel of the mission of the Holy Land, and the establishment of Franciscan houses in Cyprus was a direct result of the need to have a place of refuge and a center from where to organize a plan of action in the Holy Land during times when the Christian presence and the possibility of coming home pilgrimage were very difficult. The earliest presence of the Franciscans in Cyprus has been traced by historians to the arrival of St. Francis on the island, as we have seen, and the earliest Franciscan establishment must have been in Limassol, given that this Crusader port was the closest port of call to and from Acre. Piraccini begins his study by describing this possibility and documenting it with his scholarly research. He says that the Friars Minor settled in Cyprus from the earliest days of the order. The famous historian of the island, Louis de Malatri, dates their arrival to the years 1218-1223. Authoritative scholars such as Barnaba Meisterman hypothesized that it was Friar Elias of Cortona, appointed minister of the Franciscan Overseas Province, who sent the friars to the island. St. Francis definitely stayed there during the journey to the Orient. These are the words of Piraccini. As some ancient biographers, such as the Speculum Perfectionis record. Girolamo Golubovich presumes that the saint stayed there with his companions both on the outward journey and on his return, as the island was the only center and point of commercial and military support more than Acre itself. This is what Golubovich says in the Biblioteca Biobibliografica della Terra Santa del Loreto Francescano, the second volume. Therefore, even if Elias had not thought of organizing the mission, it was certainly Francis who led some of the friars there to expand it. Some of the suppositions that have been made regarding a possible presence of Friars Minor in Cyprus, even during the lifetime of St. Francis, like the affirmation that I've seen by Piraccini, that Francis certainly stayed in Cyprus during his journey to the Orient, will necessarily remain a hypothesis of study, even though we can say that there is a possibility that Francis himself stopped in Cyprus. It needs a bit of imagination to conceive of a lengthy presence of the saint on the island that could warrant the establishment of a house for the friars. Maybe this could have been possible had Francis stopped in Cyprus on his way back to Italy, but the Franciscan sources are silent about this. It could very well be that during the time when Elias was minister of the province of Syria, some friars could have settled in Cyprus, since it was fairly easy to travel from Acre to Limassol, and Cyprus was a hub for merchants and crusaders going to and from the Holy Land to Europe. It is certain that in the decades following the death of St. Francis, the Friars Minor settled permanently in Cyprus, particularly in Nicosia, where 2 friaries are documented to have existed, and later on in Limassol and Famagusta, where they had a friary very close to the Cathedral of St. Nicholas. Pieraccini again, quoting practically Golubovich, says that the Franciscans had a friary in Nicosia, which some historians state was founded in 1226, at the end of St. Francis' life. They also had another friary outside Nicosia called Bello Loco. I think I've seen that this refers to a village, Calocorio. It's close to Stavrovuni, Calicorio, which some historians consider to have been founded by the companions of St. Francis present on the island, and thus as the first friary in order of time. Since the friary, however, was found in a deserted place, the friars decided to sell it to the Cistercians. This place could very well have been closer to Larnaca, and the Greek, it refers to this village. Golubovich speaks about a papal rescript ex parte venerabilis by Innocent IV, regarding the fact that the Archbishop of Nicosia had protested that the sale of the friary was done illegally, and entrusting the Bishop of Tripoli and Archdeacon of Acre to decide on the matter. During the chapter of Pisa in 1263, the province of Syria was divided into two, namely that of the Holy Land and that of Romania. Romania doesn't mean Romania nowadays, but means, as you know, the Aegean, the Greek area. The Holy Land province, in turn, was divided into the custodies of Syria and Cyprus, and thus the four friars of the island formed the custody of Cyprus. This period of time, however, lies beyond the scope of our analysis. It is, however, interesting to say some words about the later development of the Cyprus mission, since it was intimately linked with the attempts to regain the Franciscan presence in the Holy Land after the fall of Acre. Golubovich documents the early Franciscan presence in Cyprus. He quotes a manuscript compiled by an anonymous friar minor around 1335 and conserved in the Sacro Convento in Assisi, with the title Liber Memorialis Diversarum Historiarum, which states that before the fall of Acre, on 18th May 1291, the guardian and other friars who resided in Acre escaped to Cyprus for safety, because they were afraid of being compelled to renounce their faith if they fell into the hands of the Saracens, whereas the other 14 friars who remained all suffered martyrdom on the tragic day when the Crusader capital was taken. By the end of the 13th century, there was therefore a numerous Franciscan presence in Cyprus, having as its principal aim the possibility of waiting for better times to go back to the Holy Land. There are also other details, like the choice by Pope Nicholas IV of electing the Minorite Giovanni d'Ancona as Archbishop of Nicosia. In 1289 we have a certain friar, Roberto de Minoli, who was Bishop of Paphos, who have various friars anyway who were here present even as bishops, but we are here at the end of the 13th century. From 1310, chroniclers record that innumerabiles peregrini were flocking to the holy places. Thus the Franciscan presence in the Holy Land was documented already in 1323-27, when the friars could cross over from Cyprus to officiate in the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre, until the time came, as the Custis said, that they could return definitely when they bought the Friar of Mount Zion. Concluding remarks. The event of St. Francis, who came to the Orient in 1219 during the Fifth Crusade and met Sultan al-Malik al-Kamil of Egypt in Damietta, is being marked by special celebrations. Indeed, the presence of Francis in these regions marks the beginning of a permanent new Latin presence in the lands of Outremer after the era of the Crusades. The Franciscan sources, as well as the important sources that come from the pen of the chroniclers of the Fifth Crusade, concentrate largely on St. Francis' visit to Damietta. They hardly mention anything regarding the Franciscan presence in other areas of the Levant. With our knowledge of the history of the Crusades and of the missionary spirit of the first friars minor, We can now conclude that after the general chapter of 1217, some friars arrived in the Crusader capital of Acre under the direction of Brother Elias and settled there. It was also in Acre that Francis landed in 1219, when he came together with 12 brothers from Italy. The sea journey that brought Francis to Ancona or Brindisi to Acre, as we have seen, made some obligatory stopovers that were customary in the era of the Crusades. 2 islands are normally mentioned as being singled out during the journey, namely Crete, under Venetian control, and Cyprus, which has passed under the Latin control of the Lusignans. The documentation we possess mentions Candia, Greek Crete, as the island where Francis stopped over on his way to Acre. Regarding Cyprus, the sources are not so explicit, except for one single episode, as we have seen, that mentions one of Francis' companions, named Brother Barbaro. The spontaneous question therefore presents itself for the umpteenth time without an answer. Did Francis visit Cyprus on the way to Acre in 1219, or at least during his return journey to Italy in 1220? No decisive answer can be given, but the indications that Francis did stop, for me, are convincing. For one thing, we know of a very early Franciscan presence in Cyprus. The island was a natural haven for merchants and crusades alike who plied the Mediterranean during the good season. It was in Cyprus that the Christians could find not only safe harbors, but also an island with an ancient Christian Byzantine tradition, in a region that now became the sole hegemony of Islam, except for the coastal enclaves of the Crusades on the Palestinian and Lebanese coast and further north at Antioch. The confining of thousands of persons in the limited and overcrowded space of Acre, with the complexity of a cosmopolitan city in which royalty, ecclesiastical hierarchy, military orders, monastic orders, mendicant orders lived in the midst of daily feuds between Pisans, Genoese, Venetians, and in the face of the constant menace of the Saracen armies in the hinterland, necessitated an open space where they could find more freedom and safety. Cyprus was precisely this place. Situated some 287 kilometers from the shoreline of the Crusader states, it was a blessing and proved to be a safe haven when Acre fell to the Saracens in 1291. It was in Acre that the Franciscans flourished, and that is why their presence in Cyprus was immediately seen as a providential element in the unfolding of the history of their presence in the Holy Land. If Francis did indeed visit the holy places, as Angelo Clareno states, this is another problem, and his brothers could desire to go on pilgrimage and to celebrate the liturgy in the same sanctuaries, it was important to have a foothold in Cyprus, from where they could organize their missionary activities in the hope of returning on a permanent basis to Jerusalem and the other holy sites. We know that this possibility became reality in the first half of the 14th century with the acquisition of the cemetery. However, such a story would not happen without the long and arduous efforts to settle in the Levant on the part of the Friars Minor. Such efforts can be traced back to the founder St. Francis, who spared no energy to be a messenger of evangelical peace among the Saracens and other non-believers. To accomplish such an idea, he must have certainly looked at the strategic importance of Cyprus. It is our belief that he did set foot on the island. Set foot. But even if he did not, he made sure that his brothers would be present on this island, which has always been a holy island for Byzantine monasticism and for its praiseworthy Orthodox tradition of faith, and for which us Franciscans has always been part and parcel of the custody of that land we call holy. Thank you.
Thank you.